Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. I heard my next guest speak at a meeting last week and was struck by his vulnerability and honesty and really just wanted to hear more. He is a filmmaker who has made a living in the ad world but is in the midst of a pretty exciting return to film. This is the first interview I've conducted in person since before the start of the pandemic, and I can't tell you what a difference it makes. Won't you please welcome Joe Marconi. I remember when I told my wife that I was going to get sober, she was like, what? It wasn't like, this is something you need. Like,
yeah.
She was like, it was kind of like, you're going to ruin our lives.
How long were you together before you got sober?
Long time. And we were married with kids by the time I got sober.
Yeah.
And it definitely seemed like so much of our life revolved around drinking and parties. Like, was that all going to end? Like, how were we going to, like, could I really, like, socialize and not get, completely plastered?
So she didn't think you had a problem?
I think she thought I had a problem, but felt maybe on some level I could or should be able to manage it. Like, it was like, I had a pretty high bottom. It wasn't high to me, but I think on paper it looked high, that like I had gotten into a fender bender that was more complicated, which is really what triggered it for me. But like, whatever. I had a job, I had kids, I was married.
By the way, the concept of the bottom, I feel like, is something that we could do like a 6-month course on.
Right?
It
could be its own
what
podcast,
is the bottom?
Right?
Because that's like one of the most elusive things. That's one of the things that kept me out for so long, was like, I'm not on the street, I'm not smoking crack, I'm not selling drugs, like I have the semblance of a life.
Right.
And then even when I came in, I had like bottom envy.
Right.
Totally. People
do
were
I
like,
really belong here?
Yeah, there were people who were like, I killed people, and it was so horrific, the things that they went through, and I was like, oh my gosh, I never experienced anything like that. I must not belong here.
I remember I went to the Wednesday men's meeting or something on the west side, or maybe it was Thursday, and I'm a newcomer. Someone comes up to me afterwards, how long you been sober? I'm like, I've been 12 days sober. And they're like, did you lose your job? And I'm like, no. And they're like, did your wife leave you? And I'm like, no. And I could see this disappointment, this confusion on his face. Yeah. Like, why would I be here if I hadn't, like, completely destroyed my life?
Yeah.
And, and the answer to that is because I was convinced I was going to destroy my life, and I find in some of these conversations, like what is, that's one of the questions, is like, what is the difference between the people who manage to get well, get sober, find recovery, and the people that don't?
Can you answer that? I can't answer that.
I mean,
not in any way that makes sense, because there's a lot of people that I think are going to stay and then don't, and then people that just sort of come in and
somehow
do it,
stay.
And I don't know how to put that into anything tangible.
I mean, I felt like there were times in my life where things had gone like off the skids, and I was still able to remember back to a time when I felt loved, like that at some basic fundamental level, someone had given me enough sense of self-worth and self-esteem that I was determined to get back to that, God, this got heavy real quick. And I've seen that in some of these conversations, other people who, have, who really got dark, I mean, some of the conversations, whether it was, Carter Stout, who was a preppy kid who ended up running drugs for the Crips, or Paco Dewan, who was running the Crips from prison.
Mm-hmm.
And like both those guys, I look at their stories, completely different backgrounds, and but somewhere in the inkling, in the beginnings of their stories, you hear about these moments of like joy and happiness in their childhood that like they just clawed their way back to somehow, I feel. At least those two. I mean, different people have different stories, obviously. But we've already digressed horribly, and
not at all. This is all good.
I want to hear your story. It's been so long since I've actually sat in a room with someone to do this. It's a completely different experience, and I'm really psyched. The thing is, are you okay using your full name?
Sure.
You don't have to, but...
Sure. I mean, I remember at the very beginning of when I remember I started making a list, like Tom Hardy, I think, is sober. I think Bradley Cooper is sober. I think,
right.
I remember making this
Who are
list
these cool people?
of people that inspired me.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so they're doing it. They're doing this thing. So maybe I can do this.
Right.
And I don't even know how I found that out. I just remember, like, I guess just asking around and hearing about certain people throughout, and then since then I've learned of so many different other people that traveled alongside us. But
so
yes,
Joseph Marconi.
Yes, sir.
You go by Joe?
Joe's fine. Yeah.
Joe generally.
Yeah.
Let's do the basic thing, which is how it was, what happened, and how it is now. Where are you from?
I'm originally from the Hudson Valley, New York.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so it's about an hour and a half north. I say Hudson Valley now because I used to say upstate New York, and people who are from upstate, which is like Albany and above, get really pissed.
Right.
So you can't say upstate New York. But yeah, I'm from the Hudson Valley. It's about an hour and a half north. It's right before the Catskills. It's beautiful, lush green area. I'm from there. But
and your childhood was
my
happy-ish?
childhood, yeah. Oh gosh, I mean, it's interesting because I started to get into this. I started to get into this at a meeting, and I had this story for this long time after sobriety that was basically kind of like there was this line of demarcation that like everything before sobriety, everything before February 12th, 2015. I was a piece of shit. And everything post sobriety, that was sort of the real me. That was my second chance. That was my chance to make it happen. And so that kind of like, put 34 years, in the doghouse. Like, there was a lot of time to just group up with this feeling of not being good. And so part of my journey now is to kind of go back to those years and find compassion for a lot of the stuff that went on, because the truth is that I wasn't a piece of shit.
Right.
I did some shitty things. We all do. Mostly I felt shitty about myself the entire time.
Right.
Most of my journey is super interior, super internal.
Sure.
I don't have a ton of memories from my childhood.
Right.
I don't really, most of my vivid memories start post-college.
Right.
Really. And that's sad to me. It brings up a lot of emotions. And, I didn't have like a bad childhood. I had a pretty idyllic childhood. Right. My parents were, early 20s when they had us, which when I think of that in itself, it's hard to imagine what they must have went through.
Totally crazy.
To have 3 kids before you're 30, and my father had his own business. My mother didn't start working.
What was his business?
He was a auto mechanic by trade, but he started his own business the same year I was born. Right. Which, I don't know how you do that. I guess I'm kind of doing the same thing now, but we'll get to that. But, he started that the same year that I was born. He was working, 16 hours a day. Right. He was out the house at 6. He wouldn't get back till 7 or 8. Right. Sometimes 9. He wasn't around a lot during the early years. Right. It was mostly me and my mom. But also at the same time, he always made time for the sports and the school events and everything. So I didn't. That was another thing we were talking about, kind of like the bottom envy or the sober compare and despair of like, I didn't have any abuse. I didn't have any, trauma in the sense of like, because I feel like we'd like to try to find a reason for the alcoholism. Yeah. We try to find a reason for like, why am I like this? Yeah. And I was thinking after you kind of came up to me and asked me, like, to do this, I was thinking about like how great is it that it's kind of mired within the structure of this thing, this program, that we don't just share once. We share multiple times.
Right.
Because I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience has been that my understanding of myself before and after sobriety changes. You know, and that there are things that I looked at that I was so angry about for so long, you know, that now I look at as like, oh, actually, like that's way more nuanced.
Right.
You know, like I was getting love, even though necessarily wasn't the love that I was looking for or needed, you know, because to be real short about it, and just steer me when you need to, because I will go all over the place. But like, very early on, I knew that I was a professional escape artist.
Right.
You know, like I understood pretty innately that colors, sounds, feelings, emotions, ideas felt louder to me than they did
Right.
to other people. You know, and I did that by, you know, testing the electric fence.
Sure.
You poke and prod and you see like, oh, how are you feeling about this or whatever. And, you know, certain things would kind of knock me out, whereas others wouldn't, you know, whatever it was a film or a book or just a feeling of feeling rejected, whatever. I was just super sensitive and hyper aware.
And was that good? I mean, sometimes like being transported by a book in a way that other people aren't is magical, but also like, you know, attending a party is just overwhelming, you know, like,
my experience of it up until like the past few years, it wasn't great.
Right.
You know, it wasn't great because, I looked at it as a mental illness.
Right.
You know, like I felt ostracized by it. I felt misunderstood by it. I felt like I had to hide. You know, I learned how to put myself away and give everybody else what they want.
Right.
You know, and that was really kind of the beginning of it at a very early age.
And when, I mean, just to give me an example, I guess, of like what that sort of looked like at what age?
Making my parents laugh, making like, you know, like that was a big one. Like making them feel like, you know, like how I wanted to kind of save the day. I wanted to make the, you know, and it's funny because till this day they're like, you know, you were so easy as a kid.
Right,
you know, they say that a lot, and I was like, that was
my survival mechanism.
Yeah, that was the mask I was wearing to make everybody feel comfortable about who they were and what was going on.
I relate to that.
Yeah,
and my parents were also 20-somethings, and I was born in New York City, so I would joke on stage that like when I was young, my parents were 20-somethings living in Manhattan, which is to say they were alcoholics. Because like, you know, in my experience, you can't be 20 years old living in a big city and not be drinking your face off. So it's sort of like, well, I'm sure there's some truth to that. Just like it's so young to have kids.
It's
like,
so young. It's so young. And by virtue of like them being who they weren't like, had I been another kid, like my brother, and that's another thing too, is that I'm the only person like me in my family.
Right.
You know, so everybody else kind of is, you know, air quotes, fine, you
right.
know, ish,
sure.
you know, as much as you can be.
Are you the eldest?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'm the oldest. I'm the only kind of artist. I'm the only person. I mean, my wife, you know, jokes around with me sometimes, like how kind of, she was like, it just doesn't really make sense that, you know? And, you know, there's, you know, it's, oh gosh, but, you know, the alcoholism stuff didn't start till much later.
When did that begin for you?
That really began in like college,
right?
You know, even though I remember, let me think now, because I remember a few things. One, I remember this group of friends. I remember that there was a group of friends that kind of approached me in high school, and that was the first time I'd really felt seen and heard.
Right.
You know, I mean, and I hope you're okay with me sharing this, but like my initial, I guess we can edit it out if you're not, my initial escape mechanism was porn and masturbation.
Right, sure.
That's where I went with it.
Totally.
You know, because I didn't really have the desire to drink yet. I was
when did you discover that? How old were you?
Oh man, I'm around 12 or 13.
What is this? That's like, I guess that's 7th or 8th grade, right?
Yeah.
And what did you have for porn at that point?
The magazines that our parents would find.
Sure.
So there was, this is the early 90s.
Right.
And so we find the magazines, and also we had this scrambler box. You remember those? Like, it was like a box that you put on top of the cable box that like you're not supposed to have, that like descrambles all the channels.
Oh, right. So you get whatever you want.
You can get whatever you want.
Right.
In addition to that, they had these like softcore channels, like all the way up, like 97, 98, 99, like these softcore porn channels that I would watch. And that was kind of like my introduction to sex and all that kind of stuff. And, and that was my first feeling of getting a hit.
Sure.
Of what that was like. That took it away. Like all the, all the kind of the pain and kind of not being seen, not being understood, not understanding my place in the world, feeling just like an outright, like defect, like, I am wrong as I am. All of that would I would take that home, I would find those channels, and I would get my hit, and I would feel kind of better about myself for the time being. That was kind of how I dealt early on. Again, it's just like, it's so tough. The childhood stuff is so tough because, and I remember when I went to my first Al-Anon thing, I realized that like, there is, even though you might not have an abusive alcoholic parent, if you go up a generation or two, you'll find it. And that's definitely the case in my family structure. Where it's like there are these patterns that we learn, of dysfunction, that even though there is so much love, there is still this dysfunction that exists, and that is such a hard thing to talk about. I don't even know if I could talk about it with any real authority to make it make sense to somebody else, that like you could still feel a sense of like, and I don't want to overuse the word trauma, but like a sense of kind of emotional pain, even though there is love.
Yeah, it's really confusing. And I think, in the, I haven't gone to an Al-Anon meeting, but it does seem to me that like in the process of breaking the cycle, it's really hard not to gravitate towards those familiar situations, because even though there's trauma associated with it, there's also love. And you're like, you want that, sometimes the trauma and the love are so intertwined that it's just hard to distinguish, like, what's the healthy choice for me?
It's so messy. And that's another thing that I'm trying to like kind of just embrace more now, is the messiness. But, so yeah, I got, I started drinking in high school, and I remember there was this one party that I just drank all night. I didn't stop. And I remember my friend was driving me home, and I don't know, I was 16 or 17 at the time. And I remember thinking like, I see myself being an alcoholic.
Right.
Like I knew because like I'd watched everybody else stop.
Right.
And me just keep going.
Was your, was like your parents' social circle, was that drinky, or was it no?
No, nothing. It was nothing spectacular. My dad had a bar downstairs that he built and I was really proud of, but there was no behavior that, my grandpa kind of like was drunk a little bit, but
right.
But there was nothing spectacular that there was nothing I modeled my behavior after.
That's interesting.
It was just something that I knew, like once I found that as an escape, I kept going, but in high school and even in college, it wasn't a continuous thing. It was a start and stop, and then I went to college for film school.
Where'd you go?
SUNY School, University of Buffalo. I didn't have, it's important to understand that like I had, for the type of person that I wanted to be, which was a high functioning artist, I had nothing to go off of.
Right, sure.
I was a raw nub of a nerve, just exposed with like no understanding of how I was supposed to take care of myself, or what do artists do? All this kind of stuff that even though I was in the accelerated art programs and people were like, you're so talented, I was like, okay, cool.
how do I get from here to there?
Yeah,
like, there's no roadmap.
That's what I'm looking for. You know, what's the whole platform? What do I do? What do I wear? What do I say? What do I think? Because right now it just feels awful, and I want to get away from it.
Right.
You know, so talented or not talented, like, you know, and so I went to like 1 full year of film school. You know, and Paul Thomas Anderson has this really funny line where he talked about it, where he was like, you know, it's exactly right. He's like, I wanted to make Terminator 2, and they were showing us Potemkin.
Right.
And he's like, and so I dropped out, and I had the exact same experience where I was like, and I didn't even know Paul Thomas Anderson back then, you know, but I get in there and I'm like ready to make, you know, Predator 5 or whatever, you know, and they're like, oh, here it is. Here's you know, Nam June Paik. And it's like, oh, okay.
Shadows and Fog.
Not ready for this yet. You know, going back, if I went there now, I would love it. But Tony, do you know who Tony Conrad is?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he was like one of the kind of artists, you know, filmmakers. He taught there, and I studied under him for a little bit.
Right.
But so anyways, so it was really like after college, I got into the workforce, didn't know what to do, became a graphic designer in advertising.
And how did you manage to figure out how to do that?
I'd always been good at the computers,
right?
You know, so I designed my dad's logo for his shop. All my friends would come over and have me design their thing. So it was just something that I could do.
So did you have like a portfolio, or it just kind of evolved?
It just kind of evolved. It was like the computer. My first earliest things, I would say porn and the computer.
Right.
I could do anything in the computer.
It's funny, my son is very much like that. Like, he's just in there, like, on his computer all the time, and I'm like, this is what I remember as masturbating.
Yeah,
just like in there, just like compulsively going at it.
Yeah. I mean, you're the master of the universe there. Yeah. Outside, you're nothing. You could turn on the computer, you control anything.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And so I found that as another way to escape very early on. So people they just kept asking me to design stuff. Before you knew it, I had like enough of a portfolio that I started getting actual work, and then that took me down to New York City pretty quickly. Like by the time I was 25, 26, I was, Madison Avenue.
And what was your first like gig or whatever? One that's
I worked at this place in Stamford, Connecticut. It was I initially put an ad out in the Penny Saver. If anyone knows,
remember the Penny Saver.
Are there still Penny Savers? I don't know.
I doubt it. I think it's called Craigslist.
Yeah, I put an ad out in the Penny Saver, and I got a bite from an old art director in New York City who still had some clients, some like camera clients, you know. And an old Jewish man, you know, Stan, like he was great. Anyways, he hired me, and that was sort of like my initial kind of, you know, where I cut my teeth in the industry. And then, he got me this other job in Stanford, which is at a printing press. Where they, you know, Pepsi would call at 5 o'clock, like, oh, we need these things by tomorrow. So then everybody's working all night printing, you know, matching color swatches, and that, like, the people who did the color timing in that industry is so crazy because you would never. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. But yeah, so I started doing that, and that for me is kind of where things really started going off the rails, because I don't know if you can relate to this, but it was sort of like I was doing everything I was supposed to do. I had a job, I was going to work, I was paying whatever bills I had, but something felt like really wrong, to the effect of like where I started having panic attacks, but I didn't know what they were at the time. You know, so I remember I went to a cardiologist, you know, and he was like, it was just so funny. He like made me wear this like halter. I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I feel like I'm going to die, you know? And he's like, okay, so we're going to put this halter monitor on you. And I had to wear this thing with all these leads for, 3 days. And then he reads it out and he's like, okay, so you have Wolfgang White's Parkinson's syndrome, which is essentially, if you don't know what that is, he says the heart is kind of like a distributor in a car, and it's controlled by these series of electrical impulses. Some people have more than one, and so your heart is kind of misfiring all the time. So we're going to go in there with a catheter, and we're going to burn out the other electrical impulses. And I was like, no, thank you. There's no way I was going to do that. I wanted to get a second opinion, but I never did.
Huh. That's amazing.
Yeah, I didn't want to, but I would, throughout the years, from about 23 to 34, I made, this is kind of sad, I guess, but like ER trips, doctor trips, psychiatrist trips. I was diagnosed bipolar by several different doctors. I was on Seroquel, Abilify, Trazodone, Klonopin. Man, that's the ones I can remember off the top of my head, but there were more.
That's crazy. Do you still take?
No.
You don't take any of it at this point. That's amazing.
No, I took that stuff for years. I would gain
wild.
a lot of weight. I would lose a lot of weight. You know, I mean, by my mid-20s, my alcoholism was in like full swing.
Right.
You know, and
when you would see these people, would they question your alcohol consumption?
They would ask me if I drank,
right.
but they wouldn't. They would say you shouldn't drink on this,
right?
But I would just drink.
Right.
There was never a question of alcoholism,
right?
It was just you shouldn't drink on this medication, but I did anyways.
It's funny, when I was about 23 or 24, I'd moved to LA and I was drinking really hard, you know, partying. Like I didn't feel like I was medicating myself. I probably was as well. And I remember after one really hard night, I had like 2 strong espressos in the morning, and I had a full-on panic attack. And I thought I was having a heart attack. And I called someone I knew who lived in LA, and I said, hey, can you recommend a cardiologist that I can call? And she was like, hang on. I can't remember. I didn't have a pen or paper handy. And I asked them if they could just leave a message on my phone. So I was just like kind of losing my mind. And she called back and she left me a message for somebody. And I called that guy, and I left him a message that said, like, look, I think I'm having some sort of cardiac incident. Give me a call back. But if I don't answer the phone, it's because I've gone for a jog. And when I finally got in touch with that guy, by Monday I felt better, right? So I'm in my office, and he calls me back finally. And I explained the whole thing. I say, I'm sorry, you know, I just think I was whatever. I think I'm fine. But I was like, oh, and I've gotten a referral to somebody, and I'm going to go see a cardiologist. So, you know, thanks. And he's like, well, if you ever find yourself in a situation like that where you need the aid of a mental health professional, give me a call. And I was like, oh my God, I called my friend, and instead of referring me to her cardiologist, she gave me her therapist number. So...
Oh my gosh.
I have definitely been in those shoes, but you had a bona fide issue, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, on that note, I just want to say, and this is super emotional for me, but like, if you have ever experienced the type of like panic attack or suicidal ideation or wanting to hurt yourself or harm yourself or others, and the experience of like trying to find help and not being able to find it when you need it is so debilitating.
Yeah, I mean, you really feel, you know, you're in a state of crisis, and it's like, well, I think I'll probably be dead by the time they return my call.
Yeah, yeah. I remember calling suicide hotlines. I remember calling, you know, or just going to the, like, you know, trying to, like,
is calling the suicide hotline helpful?
I don't remember how many times I did it, but it worked. So I'm still here.
You're still here,
you know. So, I think that whatever you can do to stay alive at that point. Yeah, like, it's just, it becomes really binary. It's like, don't kill yourself.
Sure.
You know, but for years, that was my reality. Panic attacks and wanting to kill myself, you know?
I ultimately did cognitive behavioral therapy to address my panic attacks, which was really very, very helpful for me.
So the thing with the mental illness and the you know, being diagnosed bipolar, being told that was sort of the way, it just affirmed so much of what I already thought about myself, which was like, you know, you're just bad, you're defective, you're wrong, defective. You know, all these things that I already kind of felt about myself. People aren't going to love you. You're just never going to be enough. And the thing that really, I mean, I have so many bottom stories, which I just don't care about, to be honest with you, because like they sound like everybody else's, you know, a bunch of shit happened, drugs, dangerous stuff, it all happened, you know, but like the thing that really got me kind of over the hump was, you know, in this relationship that I remember when I met this woman, I thought that this was going to be the thing that kind of like fixed me, you know, up until then I kind of just didn't really try in relationships, but she was one I really, really tried to make work, and it just didn't work. I mean, it got really bad and got really, really messy, and my alcoholism was bad, and her crazy was bad. Like, we weren't perfect. We were horrible for each other.
Right.
But like what it did was, you know, I was in my early 30s. I was 33-ish, 34, and I was watching everybody else around me kind of get lives.
Right.
You know,
sure.
They were starting families, starting careers. They were traveling the world, buying homes, all this kind of stuff. And I had none of those things, and I had no idea how to get those things. And I remember feeling for the first time, and you hear alcoholics, and if there's anything I could wish on anybody, it would be this moment, this exact moment, which is, I'm a really smart dude. I'm really capable. I can do a lot of things. I have a lot of talent, but I'm clueless, and I don't know how to get out of this. I've tried everything. I've tried exercise. I've tried abstinence. I've tried the books. I've read everything, and I don't know how to change.
Right.
You know, and I remember that it was around November, December of 2014. I remember like just specifically feeling that, and by then I knew. I was like, I tried to get sober dozens of times. I have 10 years of journals where I was like trying to get sober, it's just like not figuring out. So, you know, in 2015, after that relationship, I pulled a geographic and drove cross country from New York to LA with a close friend of mine. And that was one of the best times of my life. I was still drinking, but it wasn't like alcoholic drinking. It was like, it's just drinking. It was just regular. But
we were also on an adventure.
We were on an adventure. We got to see the world. I mean,
there's nothing better than
it was so great, and that's where I saw the Grand Canyon. Where
right.
You know, talked about that thing where
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's like, you know, and I remember I was meditating in the meditation.
Right.
And that's where the Grand Canyon just popped in my
head. That occurred to you for the first time?
Yeah, at that meeting because we're meditating,
right.
And
well, just explain it briefly so
that
like people can understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, so there's this meeting, and in the beginning we meditate for 5 minutes or whatever. And during that meeting, I thought of the Grand Canyon, just popped in my head, and I thought to myself, this is a pretty good analogy. And so what I had said was, have you ever been to the Grand Canyon? Show of hands. A bunch of guys raised their hands, some didn't. And it's like, and then I said, have you ever tried to explain what the Grand Canyon looks like to someone who's never seen it before? It's kind of impossible. And that's kind of like what my experience of sobriety has been. There's this incredible thing that's like cosmic and spiritual and life-changing. But until you go through it, it's kind of like just looking at a picture of the Grand Canyon. You know, and... yeah, so I just, that felt very apropos, and it was funny how like that really seemed to connect.
So, I mean, it is hard. I mean, I went to the Grand Canyon during the pandemic, and like my first glimpse of it as we were, you know, sort of driving through the parking lots and trying to find it was just took my breath away. I mean, I just couldn't believe it was real, you know, that it was, and until you experience that, it's meaningless.
It really is. I mean, but then like because like this is again what's really, I have to do the work about that demarcation line that I started the conversation with about before sobriety and after sobriety, because, you know, the way I got sober was I had 2 weeks in LA and Hollywood. Where
you make it here.
I make it here.
Right.
My friend and I, we split. We go. He goes back home. He flies back home. I scramble to find an apartment. I get a studio in Hollywood in a really shitty place. And
what street are you on?
Oh
I'm always so curious. Like,
it was Santa Monica and Vine, right?
Right.
On it's called Eleanor Street, and in that I was there for I don't know a year and a half, 2 years, and during that time, the shit that I saw, I found a dead woman in my building. I saw someone try to kill themselves in my building. It was horrible. It was just like...
I feel like was someone murdered in that building, like in sort of a high profile way?
Not that I know, but I'm sure that it happened. You know, I mean, it was dark. You know, It was dark, but somehow I managed to get sober. I mean, the way that I did was, you know, the brief story is, I was just bender for like 2 weeks there. You know, I moved there and was drinking every night.
Did you know people here?
No, I mean I had a few friends here. My brother was here, so yeah, I knew some people. But in Hollywood, no, I had no friends. But I had a few people. That's not entirely true. But for the most part, I thought I was gonna move to LA, and like sell my screenplay, like get rid of, like everyone does, you know?
Yeah.
And I got here and it was, and I remember, it's just too many stories. You know, I had like a 2-day bender, and I remember waking up, and I'm 34. I'm sleeping on a air mattress that's half deflated, and I have a sheet over the window, and there's just bottles, empty bottles, and that's all I had. That's all I was in my apartment, and a typewriter, because I was that kind of artist. It was like a typewriter's gonna do the trick, you know. And I woke up and I was like, okay, let's try this sobriety thing. And I mean, I'm from New York City. You know, I lived in New York City for 10 years, you know, so I did not believe in God. I did not believe in a higher power. There was nothing. We were alone. I was an atheist. We were just going to die. The whole thing. You know, I wake up and I said, all right, I'm going to try this AA thing. But first, I need to get coffee. So I'm on Santa Monica and Vine. As a context, for anyone knows the geography, I don't know the area. I Yelp coffee house. I find Bliss Coffee. I say, great. That's a 7-minute walk. I'm going to go get coffee, and then I'll look for an AA spot. So I'm walking up the street, and at the time, I had all these reminders that would come up in my phone throughout the day, like to try to like motivate me, you know, like go win the day, like you can do it, you know, there's all these things that would pop up to try to like pump myself up. And I was going to add a reminder, go to AA.
Right.
With the thinking being, if I saw it enough times, eventually I would go. I wasn't going to go to AA. That's the day is already over. It's you know,
it's 11.
It's 11, you know. And I get to Bliss, which is like 7 minutes later, and I walk in and there's a fucking AA meeting right there.
Did you know what it was?
I had no idea. I had no idea.
I've been to that meeting.
Yeah, we all have. It's iconic, you know. But I walk in there and, again, I'm atheist, but that moment was as close to like a white lightish moment as I could have, where I was like, I'm not gonna get a sign that's bigger than this.
Yeah.
You know, and I remember asking, like, is this an AA meeting? And, you know, I was like, they just shook their heads. Can I stay? And I sat down and I stayed.
That's amazing that you were able to do that. That you had the wherewithal to ask to stay. I mean, I just, like, I don't know. I mean, I felt like I had to be like I needed full concierge service to get me into AA. Someone to like take me to a meeting, tell me that this one's a good one. Like, you know, I mean, you know, I was with the cool kids.
Yeah, but back to that smash, that Mary Elizabeth Winstead moment. You know, I was so scared.
Right.
I was terrified.
Right.
You know, and I'd been on my knees for months, like asking for a solution.
Right.
I was talking to friends, like, I don't know how to do this thing called life. Right. I have no idea. And I don't understand because I feel like I should be able to do it.
Right.
But I don't. Everything I do, I keep hitting the same wall with my head over and over and over and over again. You know, I just want a life and I don't know how to get it. And so when, you know, AA presented itself to me in that way, I was so willing to say, like, I'm out of ideas.
And how was that meeting?
It was great. I mean, I went there for the first 6 months to a year. But then,
was there a meeting there every day at 11?
No, like all day.
I mean, it's all day, basically.
Yeah, it's all day, every day.
And did you talk to someone after that first meeting to be like, how do I come back?
Yeah, I talked to a guy who became my sponsor for a little bit. And I mean, even that's just like one of the things about this program that's super, super, oh man, it's like when you're just in that space of complete loneliness and despair, and to have somebody come up to you and say, like, hey, I see you,
right,
and we love you,
right,
even if you don't love yourself, give me a call, here's my number, is like unbelievably powerful, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I find that, I don't know, there's something, I mean, I talked about it from time to time in meetings, that like it is a miracle. It's almost, and like, I don't always believe in it, but it's almost like, I don't know if you ever saw that show, AO on Netflix. OA.
Yeah.
And it's almost, I mean,
Yeah.
I sometimes feel like if I just know the motions,
Yeah.
it will transport me to the place. And I feel like when I participate, which I'm not always great at it, but that even though it doesn't make sense to me because the formula seems to be 1 + 1 = infinite, you know?
Yeah.
But it works, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that sometimes just putting my faith in the things they tell you to do just changes everything.
I remember I watched that show a second time because I loved it so much. And
Yeah.
when I did the dance at the end, I fucking
Oh, you knew the
cried.
dance,
I just
right?
bawled, because I was
And
like,
did you get transported to another
I
dimension?
did. I learned all the moves, and I went to different dimensions.
I love that show. I mean, that show is so...
I was so sad when
I
it was
thought
canceled.
it was just so nuts, and I just admired how just completely all in
Yeah,
everyone was in that show.
In my old neighborhood, I used to run into Britt Marling all the time, and I would kind of just fan out on her, and she was so sweet.
Oh, that's cool.
I appreciate what you're saying because that's an aspect of sobriety that I try to talk about a lot, and I don't know how we're doing on time, but because the other journey is the post-sobriety journey,
right?
Like what it's like now,
yeah.
And like I got the sponsor and I did the steps and I went hardcore into it. I was in a perfect spot in my life. I didn't know a lot of people. I had friends and family out here, but they were all over the place. They were off doing their own thing.
And were you working? Did you have a job when you landed?
Yeah,
here?
I actually found a job as an art director. I was still in the advertising space at a nonprofit in Culver City, so I was doing that. And that was kind of.
Did you have that before you came
out?
No,
I just willed it into existence.
Right.
I found this shitty studio apartment and I got this full-time job, and I was like really, really lucky that had, again, HP was looking out for me huge with that stuff, but I went hard into the program for the first, year or two where it was really like, that was the main thing that I did because I started seeing dividends right away. Right away. From where I was to just having a week of sobriety, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe the difference with only a few days.
Right.
And to just kind of circle back to the mental illness thing, at that time, I was on something called Lamictal as another thing that I was on. So I was on Lamictal and Klonopin or clonazepam. I think that's the same thing. At the end. So those are the two things I was regulating my bipolar disorder. That I was diagnosed, told I was going to live with this for the rest of my life. I had somebody out in New York who was like kind of writing these prescriptions. I had nobody out here, and I was trying to find somebody. But then I thought, you know what? I've never had a baseline. I've never been sober.
Right.
And I remember, I don't know what it was like for you, but I was so tired for the first 18 months of my sobriety. I slept constantly. If I wasn't at work or a meeting, I was sleeping. I could not. And I remember asking people around it. They were like, yeah, you haven't slept for 30 years. You stay up all night, going and before there was a year in my life where I was a nightlight photographer in New York City. I saw the sun come up every night for a year.
Wow.
So I was like, I don't have a baseline of what I would be like without anything in my system. So I'm going to wean myself off. And everyone's like, don't do that.
Right.
I was like, I'm going to wean myself off and see what happens. So I weaned myself off. And then I discovered meditation at that time too. And meditation is a huge part of my story.
Right.
Because, and it's part of the steps. And I immediately started gravitating towards people. I was like, what are you doing? And they did a lot of things differently, but then they had the meditation as a part of it. I do a lot of Buddhist meditations now, and which is, that's its own thing we can get into. But you were talking about kind of like doing the right configuration of moves, and I've always tried to hack sobriety. Because there was a big time for a while where I got into the this whole kind of like the wellness movement, the ice baths and the saunas and the breathing, and I'm going to walk around with no shoes on, and I'm going to sun gaze and all this kind of stuff to kind of like enhance my sobriety and connection to the spiritual power and spiritual stuff. But, that ultimately was kind of short-lived for me,
And are you still working in advertising?
No. So, look, man, this I was, I was able to meet a woman, get married, have a kid. We have our own place in Atwater now, and which having all that stuff is insane. And advertising, I never wanted to do advertising. I always wanted to do film.
Right.
I got back into film in around 30, like 29, 30. I found my way back to it, and I've been working my way to it ever since. And so now, without getting into the specifics, I've been working on a feature film, writing it and developing it for 3 years.
Right.
We got into the Film Independent last year. I don't know if you know them, but we got into the producer lab and the fast track, and
right. Oh, wow. How cool.
Just last night we signed with this like dream come true production company.
Wow, congratulations. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's so insane. It's so insane that we're gonna make this movie with this partner that is everything we could hope it to be. That because we had to navigate some bumps and bruises along the way. And, that was a big learning experience. But if there was one thing to take away from that, that I'd want to say would be that like had it not been for like learning the value of like going to meetings and like doing something like a fourth step and taking the time that it takes to do it, and learning how to persist, like Stephen Pressfield, War of Art, like how to keep showing up. I learned that here. Right. You know what I mean? I always had the talent and capability, but I didn't have the discipline to sit down and do the work. Sure. And it feels so right. Like I feel like, okay, it doesn't feel like a mistake that I'm here anymore. Right. It feels like, yeah, we've earned it. Yeah, we've got to this point, and we have like such a talented cast. I have the best producer. Now we have the best partners, and we're gonna make this movie this year. And did you write the script on your own, or do you have a writing partner? No, I wrote it myself. Yeah. Right. And you're gonna direct it as well? Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. It's so crazy. It's so crazy. So that's I'm curious, one thing, what's your conception of a higher power at this point? Oh gosh. Okay. Great question. My perception of a higher power is it is very elemental. It is not at all organized. It is very internal and I'm going to use this analogy because maybe you'll like this, and maybe you can say it in a better way, because to me it sounds so funny, but I can't get people to laugh. Okay, so we're sitting in this room right now, right. You and me, right? And we're both breathing the same air, okay? But we think of ourselves as completely autonomous and separate from this air that we breathe. Sure. Right? But if you were to look at the air as like a soup, for example, that like goes into my body and comes out and then goes into your body. Right. It's like we are so super hyper connected to each other in this way that is impossible to understand. Like everything is super symbiotic. Sure. And I've been really into the Buddhist kind of text and philosophy, even though that's a philosophy. It's not about a higher power, but I think there is this idea of this higher self, this connection, this flow that is at that fulcrum of where things don't make sense, because so much of this program doesn't make sense, even in the text itself. It's like, it's like half measures availed us nothing, and then they say, take what you want, leave the rest in the same breath, and it's like, what? Right. Where am I supposed to? Classic Buddhist cone, right there. Yeah, like all these sort of like things that are complete conflict with each other, but live in the same space, and I think that's kind of where that higher power is, because within us is that same fulcrum. What does my ego want versus what does my heart want? And that's as an artist, as a writer, storyteller, and director, that's what I'm most obsessed with, is that, it's like I can go for a hike in the woods and think, oh, why am I not here all the time? Right. This is perfect. but let's get in the car and get back to the city because I got work to do.
Right,
you know?
right.
And it's the constant kind of push and pull of like, how do I find myself in between there? And how do I find any sense of balance or happiness? You know, I guess that's the kind of the best answer I could give, is that, you know, this connection that we all have, that the more I get out of my own way, but also, I mean, you know, to bring the Buddhism back into it, you know, for me, why I like it in conjunction with the 12-step program is, to me, 12-step program is kind of like a lot of, you know, you can't do it on your own. You need a higher power. Let's do an inventory, see where you fucked up. Let's call out those defects for what they are. Let's make apologies for what they are. Let's learn how to meditate and pray, and let's help spread the message, you know? Whereas, you know, and even though they kind of do the same thing, Buddhism does it in a little bit different way, where it's like, you know, and this helps integrate with kind of like the porn and sexuality stuff that I mentioned at the beginning, because that's a lot of my journey right now, is learning how to integrate that. Because I don't know how you feel, but as a man, I feel, what the fuck do I do with my sexuality? I'm angry a lot of the time. I don't know what to do with that either.
Right.
You know, and I'm scared constantly.
Right.
You know, so am I just gonna write, you know, how many fear inventories do I have to write? You know, past several weeks I've been doing these meditations where it's kind of like, okay, let's just sit with that. Like, literally go into those spaces, you know, and go there. And that's been really fucking fantastic for me. Like, that has been, I don't want to oversell it, but it, like, just learning how to be with those feelings in a different way and kind of like show those feelings compassion.
Right.
You know, because that's something that I never gave myself, even in sobriety.
Sure.
Which is compassion for the body, for the me, for just without all the bells and whistles and all the things and all the things that I'm supposed to have and don't have or want or might not get, whatever, to just have compassion and love for this person, this being, you know. I know the question was like, what's my perception of a higher power?
No,
this is the best I can answer.
I think that yeah, I mean, look, it's complicated, obviously, but I mean, I do think that notion of compassion for, you know, whatever, you know, those needs inside you that are unmet, or emotions that are full of shame or longing or whatever it is, that to just recognize, you know, the sort of basic human nature of those emotions,
right.
that like that everyone experiences, and that, yeah, we should just you know, I think you said when I heard you speak before, that like, you know, that sort of recognition that I am enough.
Yeah.
That like I don't need to be more than an imperfect human to deserve love and compassion. I think that.
Well, it's like you said at the very beginning, you know, this sort of like, you know, return to innocence kind of thing, you know, is chasing that initial feeling. And, you know, when you have kids and you see them, I mean, when I look at my daughter and I see the kind of the love that she has for the world, there's this unbridled, unstoppable love she has for everything.
Right.
You know, you realize like that is a natural state.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that is something that we all have available to us. And we learn the other stuff later on. You know, whether or not chicken or the egg, am I alcoholic, was born genetic? I don't know. I don't care about that. You know? But, again, I guess I could also say that a lot of people say God is love. I think that's incomplete. You know? I think if you're really going to be an integrated human today, God is also fear. God is also anger. God is also shame. God is also, you know, jealousy. It's all these things, if we're able to learn to sit with them and to see, because they teach us.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you know, that child's innocent embrace of everything the child knows, if you can then take that into adulthood in this way that like, oh, now we understand so many more things, and to have compassion and love for all of that as well is really, I mean, I'm not there, but it's a place I would love to be. And sometimes, sometimes I find I am there. Like, I am, I have these moments of, overwhelming gratitude for just the state of things. Yeah. And then whatever, that is very fleeting, but I would love to live more in that space.
It is so difficult to really find that compassion and integration for all those other things that are nasty and ugly and messy, because especially in this country, especially in this city, it is like, whether you want to acknowledge it openly or not, it is like, this is what success looks like. This is what you're supposed to look like. This is what you're supposed to do. And, no matter where you are on the spectrum of anything, you're going to feel that. Yeah. So to kind of open up to yourself and say like, wow, man, like sometimes I have these thoughts that aren't so good. I wish I didn't think about these thoughts that much. And if you could even just switch that and say, oh, well, why am I thinking this?
Right.
Let's look at that.
Right.
It's okay that I thought this.
Yeah, that's part of me.
That's part of me. It's okay. Like, what's
not
wrong?
All of me.
It's
either.
Not all of me. And they say that you are not your thoughts. Okay, cool. Maybe not. That's a fun exercise to have. But I'm trying to get to a space more and more now where it's like there is no ideal.
Right.
There is no ideal. It's just a mess.
Yeah.
At its best, it's really just a mess.
Right.
And if I can just get through it with as much integrity and compassion and love as possible, I'll be okay.
That's great. I think that's a great place to end.
Thank you so much.
Joe. That's awesome.
I really appreciate this.
Great to sit down with you. Thanks for listening. You can support this podcast at patreon.com/thedrunkalogs.